Welcome to the Living Aware Parenting podcast. My name's Marion Rose, PhD, and I am so glad to be sharing about aware parenting with you. Aware parenting was created by Aletha Solter, PhD. You can find her work at the Aware Parenting Institute website at www.awareparenting.com. I'm a Level 2 Aware Parenting instructor and the Regional Coordinator for Australia, New Zealand and Indonesia. I've been an aware parenting instructor since 2005, and I've been practicing aware parenting since my daughter, the first of my two children, was a baby in 2002. In the Living Aware Parenting podcast, I share about Aletha Solter's work in the most distilled and concise way that I can to support parents to understand the philosophy of this groundbreaking approach, the practices and ways to live and embody this life-changing work. I've been fascinated by this work for more than 2 decades, and my understanding of it becomes more and more nuanced over time. I am so willing for this podcast to bring you even more clarity, compassion and deep care in your own unique journey. Thank you for coming on this voyage of discovery with me. In this episode, I'm going to share about the underpinnings and influences of aware parenting and about the journey that Aletha Solter, PhD, the founder of Aware Parenting, has taken and the effects of her journey on aware parenting. Aletha Solter shares about her own journey of learning, specifically about her experiences with schools, learning and teaching in her most recent book, Raising Joyful Lifelong Learners, which I highly recommend reading. So, Aletha Solter was influenced in more general ways as well as by specific theories and perspectives, and I'd love to share some of those with you today. So general influences include the scientific method. So I'm going to be sharing some websites with you today. So this is about his dad. So her father, Joseph Yauch, was a theoretical physicist, and from him she learnt to deeply value the scientific method. So here, and as always, I'll be sharing the links with all the pages that I share here, so if you want to learn more about him and his work, this is all about it here. So as a young adult, she also taught the history of science as a substitute teacher at the academic high school in Geneva that she herself had been to. And when writing her books, she does detailed research, a lot of research, which you can read in the copious references in terms of books and research articles that she includes at the end of every one of her books. So the scientific method, what is that? I looked up the Oxford English Dictionary definition. It is a method of observation or procedure based on scientific ideas or methods that has underlain the development of natural science since the 17th century. It's now commonly represented as ideally comprising some or all of A. Systematic observation, measurement and experimentation, B. Induction and the formulation of hypotheses, C. The making of deductions from the hypotheses, D. The experimental testing of the deductions, and if necessary, E. The modification of the hypotheses. And in fact, in the later episodes, I will talk about how we can be our own experimenters when we practice aware parenting. So we can use this scientific method in terms of really observing our child or the children that perhaps we're caring for, and really looking at that in relation to aware parenting as a philosophy and experimenting with the practices and then observing the differences in our children. This is one of my passions. I also have a background in observing babies and children in developmental psychology, and I love that as parents, any parent can also do that, go through that process. So here's her page about her on the Aware Parenting Institute website. I'm quoting this. During her master's degree in human biology, where she studied topics including human physiology and anatomy, anthropology, genetics, evolution and psychology, she studied with the deeply influential Jean Piaget doing a 2-year course in developmental psychology with him and attending his advanced seminars. Now, Piaget was a very influential psychologist, so I also did a degree in psychology. Piaget was one of the key theoreticians in cognitive psychology. He was very influential. And I loved reading in her most recent book that at the time when she studied with him, she didn't realise he was so well known. And Piaget's work also was based on the observation of children. So here, again, lots of information about Piaget. If you're listening again, I do share the links so you can also go and read the pages that I'm speaking from. So here is a quote from this pressbooks.pub website about Piaget. It says, "He was a renowned 20th century psychologist and pioneer of developmental child psychology. The primary focus of his work came from asking how knowledge grows and what it looks like for knowledge to be acquired individually. Through continued research, he described a new theory of cognitive development. From Piaget's observation of children, he proposed that cognition developed through distinct stages, from birth through to the end of adolescence. Each stage had a sequence of thinking patterns with 4 key features." So, again, you can discover more about that if you want to. There's a whole lot here about him and the theories and the strengths and limitations, of course, over time. That's part of the scientific method, that as people keep on studying and experimenting, that often new information is discovered. So, back to awareparenting.com, Aletha Solter's website. In her PhD at the University of California, she did additional training in psychology as a science, including research methodology. And so when she began to write her books, starting with The Aware Baby in 1984, all of these influenced her to include as much research-based evidence as possible. And again, so this really links back to what I've been saying about each of us as parents, or if you are a carer of children in whatever way, we can acquire so much information through observation. If you know my work, you know I'm also really passionate about this. And so this is a core part of where Aletha Solter acquired information about the emotional and cognitive development of children. Was through observing her own 2 children. So using all the tools and ways that she had learned, she observed them carefully, took a lot of notes and formulated theories to explain their behaviour. So again, this is what Piaget had also done with his 3 children when he was also wanting to really understand children more clearly. In addition, her understanding of her own traumatic experiences as a child gave her insight into potential sources and outcomes of stress and trauma. And her own experience with crying as a form of emotional healing as an adult also affected her interpretations of her children's crying. So I'd love to share a bit more about her background, because all of these influences I found, I don't know about you, but when I'm passionate about a map, a model, a paradigm, I want to understand about the person or people who created it. And so for me, gathering together this information over time about Aletha Solter and what influenced her, I just find it so fascinating. So let's go back to this page about her dad again. So her father, Joseph, was Swiss, and her mother, Tonya, was born, so again I'm showing a picture of her mum. She was born in the US of Norwegian descent, and from 1940 to 1942 they lived in Geneva, where they met Carl Jung, and they were part of his inner circle of people who met regularly with him for mutual dream analyses. So again, if you don't have a history or background in psychology, or you haven't studied the work of Jung, he was incredibly influential. So I only learnt this year about Aletha Solter's parents being part of his inner circle, meeting with him for mutual dream analyses. Oh my gosh, I mean, that is what an experience that would have been. So Aletha lived in the US until the age of 12, apart from a year living in Cambridge, UK, and then she lived in Europe until she was 23, becoming fluent in 4 languages. And meanwhile, behaviorism, which if you're familiar with that, and if you read the PDF I wrote a few months ago about all the different perspectives to crying, I talked a lot about behaviorism there and behavior modification. So behaviorism was very influential around about the 50s, the 60s. It arose mostly in the US, and it really focused on behavior and also a lot on punishments and rewards. And it was dominant in the 1960s when Aletha was in Europe. However, behaviorism was not influential in Europe while she was there, so in either education or therapy, and it still really hasn't been, apparently. So again, when Aletha gave me this information some years ago, I was, again, so interested. Like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. I hadn't known this. I love understanding people's experience more and what influences them, and particularly Aletha. So education in Europe was more influenced by Europeans such as Montessori, Steiner and Piaget, and psychotherapy was influenced by people like Freud and Jung, and later approaches that were very different to behaviorism. Again, were much more about the internal experience of a human being. So Aletha was in a really different cultural environment. Her going to schools that were not based on behaviourist educational approaches, and so she wasn't being indoctrinated into that behaviourism, which is so often when we're a teenager, the environment we're in will often have a big effect. And then when she went on to study with Piaget, she saw how he looked underneath the surface of children's behaviour to really work out the causes of those behaviours. And so although his focus was on cognitive development, Aletha went on to use that same approach when developing her own work on emotional development, which then became aware parenting. Aletha was then a postdoctoral researcher and lecturer at the University of California for a few years. And so here I'm quoting from awareparenting.com. It says here, when her first child was born in 1977 following a traumatic birth, she did not find any parenting books that advocated attachment-style parenting and non-punitive discipline while taking into account the impact of stress and trauma on children's development. The first book she wrote, The Aware Baby, first published in 1984, revised in 2001, is the one that she would have liked to have as a new mother. And going back to Aletha Solter's mother, I invite you to read about her and her life. She studied lots of different things for quite some length of time. She worked as a counsellor and she ran counselling groups and workshops. So again, there's this background in scientific research, in counselling, in feelings, in exploring the human being. Those are more general influences in terms of scientific method and so on. So here's some more specific influences. So when Aletha wrote The Aware Baby in 1984, so here's the page about The Aware Baby. By the way, I love, and I remember early on when I first found out about aware parenting and I read the reviews and endorsements, and these were all people that I'd known about, for example, from pre and perinatal psychology like Thomas Verney and David Chamberlain, William Emerson, some amazing reviews and endorsements, and here's also the news release, so where it gives more detail about the book. If you haven't read it, I really, really, really recommend it. Even if you're a parent and your children are older, just to really understand babies in this way, I very much recommend it. So The Aware Baby, and again, if you look at the back, you can see lots and lots of references. So every chapter has a big, long list of references. So references for chapter 1, big, long pages of references here. So there's a lot of research that's gone into every single one of her books, something which she's really passionate about, as we've already talked about. So it was influenced by, amongst others, Frédéric Leboyer, who wrote Birth Without Violence, amongst others. If you haven't read that book, gosh, again, that was such a life-changing book for me. John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, who were pioneers in attachment theory and research. Jean Piaget, who wrote The Continuum Concept, very influential book in terms of understanding the different experience that babies and toddlers have growing up in more industrialized cultures compared to indigenous cultures. She looked at cross-cultural studies. She looked at the work of people like Klaus and Kennel with their maternal-infant bonding. The book The Family Bed by Tina Thevenin, which I remember when my daughter was a baby, that was still really, it was one that lots of people recommended. Thomas Gordon, who developed parent effectiveness training. Arthur Yanov, who created primal therapy. Maria Montessori, the educational reformer. Well, in fact, I don't know if reformer is an apt title, but I love Montessori as well. John Holt, who wrote How Children Learn, again, incredible work. And Clara Davis and the research into the self-selection of diet. So these, you can see the flavour of these in The Aware Baby. And her more recent books, so she's written 7, have been informed and influenced by new research and theories in the fields of child development, neurophysiology, attachment, trauma, and psychotherapy. And she's constantly researching and keeping up to date with the research in many of these fields. So what about sharing aware parenting? Well, from 1984, Aletha's been giving workshops, classes, and lectures about aware parenting for both parents and professionals. And again, let's go back to her website. It says here, here I've got it highlighted. In 1990, she founded the Aware Parenting Institute, which now has certified instructors in over 25 countries. So I am one of those. I'm delighted to be one of those. Her goal is to help create a non-violent world in which all children are allowed to attain their full potential. With the tools of aware parenting, she's confident that parents can raise their children to be competent, compassionate, non-violent, and drug-free. So I'd love to offer a little summary of what I've shared with you today. Aletha Solter's work was influenced in general ways, such as by the scientific method, including from the influence of her father and from Piaget. She was also influenced by the place where she lived during her teenage years, Europe, and the lack of behaviourism there. Aware parenting was also influenced by specific maps and models, both during her academic study and during her own personal research. And aware parenting was also deeply informed by her own observations of her own children. Aware parenting thus brings together and integrates a plethora of rich information by which parents and professionals can understand the needs, feelings, and behaviours of children. So, I'm so willing for this to have been helpful and interesting information for you. I really absolutely love understanding all of these things and to see how they're woven through the fabric of aware parenting. Thank you so much for listening to or watching this episode. I'm so willing for you to have found it helpful. If you'd like further resources, here is a summary of the details. You can find the full information in the show notes. I do have another podcast, the Marion Rose podcast, where I talk about all my other interests and offerings. It includes the Marion Method work, which consists of reparenting as well as what I call reculturing, which includes reclaiming our yeses and nos, getting free from what I call disconnected domination culture conditioning, such as guilt and coercion, and lots more. As of September 2025, Aletha Solter PhD has 7 published books, which you can find on her website, which is awareparenting.com/books.htm. And as of September 2025, I have 4 solo published books for parents and 2 for children, with more coming soon. You can also find out about those on my website, which is marionrose.net/books. In the show notes, I also share links for my free and paid online courses, one-to-one mentoring, and social media. I also give information about becoming an aware parenting instructor in my region and finding other aware parenting instructors to work with. See you in the next episode.